Marcus Aurelius stands as one of the most paradoxical figures in all of Roman history. A ruler draped not in gold, but in thought. Known as the Philosopher Emperor, he was the last of the so-called 5 good emperors, a man who ruled one of the greatest empires ever known, while writing words that sounded more like prayers than decrees. His book, Meditations, became a sacred text of Stoic philosophy, whispering wisdom about self-control, pain, and fate. Yet behind those calm reflections lies something far darker. Because what if those writings weren't meant for peace, but for survival? What if Meditations wasn't simply a guide to virtue, but a coded cry from a man haunted by visions, betrayal, and the weight of the empire itself? This story will take us deep into the twilight of Rome's glory, where philosophy meets prophecy, and where a man trying to master his own soul ends up facing shadows that neither logic nor reason could explain. We'll explore his reign, his strange dreams, the wars that mirrored his inner turmoil, and the mysterious legacy of a ruler who may have seen the fall of Rome long before it came. Picture this: a cold night in the northern frontiers of the Roman Empire. The sky is bruised with smoke, and the air hums with the silence that only follows battle. Inside a tent lit by a single trembling flame sits Marcus Aurelius, not in royal robes, but in the rough cloak of a soldier. His armor is dented, his eyes heavy, his hands ink-stained instead of bloodied. Before him lies no map of conquest, only a small wax tablet, and on it he writes not decrees, not laws, but words to himself. You have power over your mind, not outside events. These lines, whispered to the page like a prayer, would one day be read across millennia. But in that moment they are nothing more than survival, a man's desperate attempt to stay sane while the world around him begins to rot. He is the Emperor of Rome, and yet he writes as if he's trying to remind himself he's still human. Marcus Aurelius was never supposed to be this kind of ruler. The empire expected a conqueror. What it received was a philosopher. A man who thought more than he spoke, who listened more than he commanded. Trained from youth in the ways of Stoicism, Marcus believed in self-control, in the calm within chaos, in the discipline of the soul. But philosophy was easy in the marble halls of Rome. It was different here, on the battlefield, surrounded by the dying breaths of men who fought for his name. His teacher, Epictetus, had once said that the true test of virtue is in adversity. And adversity was all Marcus knew. Each night, when exhaustion silenced the camp, he wrote. Some say it was his way of thinking. Others believe he was confessing to something no one else could understand. His meditations were not written for glory. They were written to stop himself from unraveling. But there's something eerie about those writings, something unspoken. Scholars read them and feel an undercurrent, like the soft hum of a storm beneath the calm. In one passage, he reminds himself to accept fate. In another, he warns himself not to be consumed by sorrow, and in some, the tone shifts, almost as if he is arguing with a voice that isn't his own. Was he writing to his higher self? Or was he trying to drown out something darker? Ancient soldiers told tales of their emperor walking the camp alone at night, whispering to the wind as if speaking to invisible company. They said he saw things, strange lights, omens, shadows that moved without shape. Marcus never mentioned them in Meditations, but his words grew heavier, his reflections more desperate. Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years, he wrote. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. Why did those words sound more like warnings than wisdom? To many, Meditations is the most peaceful book ever written by a ruler. But when you read it alone, past midnight, there's a chill that lingers. You can almost feel the presence of the man himself. Tired, burdened, writing to no audience but his trembling soul. His words were never meant for us. They were the diary of a haunted emperor, a whisper carved into the noise of history. Maybe he wasn't teaching others how to live. Maybe he was trying to convince himself that life still had meaning, because power had not saved him from pain, philosophy had not silenced his fears, and even the crown of Rome could not shield him from the one truth he could never conquer, that even emperors are mortal. And perhaps, in the stillness of that night, he realized something more terrifying, that the fall of Rome would begin not with armies, but with the decay of its own soul. So when you read Meditations, do not imagine marble statues or golden thrones. Imagine a man sitting alone under the freezing stars, writing by dying firelight. A man who led millions but spoke only to himself. His empire was vast, yet his heart was lonely. And every word he wrote was a candle in the dark, a flicker against the endless night of doubt. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher who ruled an empire but sought mastery over his own mind. The emperor who conquered not by sword or fire, but by facing his own reflection. And somewhere in those pages, among the calm and reason, if you listen closely, you might just hear him whispering still. Long before the golden laurel touched his head, Marcus Aurelius was just a fragile boy standing in the shadow of an empire already trembling. Born in 121 AD, he came into a world of power and perfection. Marble streets, gods of stone, and senators who played politics like war. But beneath the glittering surface, Rome was cracking. Its wealth grew, its morals decayed, and its citizens whispered that the old gods had gone silent. Marcus, even as a child, could feel it. While other boys dreamed of victory and blood, he dreamed of silence, of understanding the strange storm within himself. He would one day command armies, but his first battle was always against his own thoughts. From the beginning, Marcus seemed out of place in his own world. His teachers noticed how he stared too long at the horizon, how he preferred scrolls to feasts and questions to answers. When he was just 12, Emperor Hadrian himself saw something ancient in the boy's eyes. He called him Verissimus, the truest one. A curious nickname for a curious soul. Hadrian arranged his path to power, but it wasn't the palace that shaped him. It was philosophy. At a time when Rome worshipped wealth, Marcus studied humility. While others feared death, he studied it. He was drawn to the words of Epictetus, a former slave who taught that life's only freedom was mastery of the mind. But imagine being a boy surrounded by power, learning that everything you see, the riches, the fame, the empire, means nothing. To the young Marcus, that wasn't peace. It was a revelation and a curse. There's a legend, one that his tutors whispered years later, about a dream he had as a teenager. In it, he saw Rome drowning in its own brilliance, its marble buildings melting into rivers of gold that swallowed its people whole. When he awoke, he refused food for days, saying he had seen the weight of empire. Whether it was a vision or a troubled mind, no one could say. But from that moment on, something in him changed. He began sleeping on hard floors, dressing in simple cloaks, training himself to feel nothing, to need nothing. The others thought it was madness. Marcus called it preparation. Perhaps he already sensed that destiny would demand not luxury, but endurance. And maybe, just maybe, that dream was the first whisper of the burden that would follow him to the throne. By the time he reached adulthood, chaos was no longer around him. It was within him. Rome was a roaring beast of ambition, and Marcus walked through it like a ghost, calm yet restless, brilliant yet burdened. He had learned to master pain, but not the ache of foresight, that quiet, unshakable feeling that his life would not be his own. When Hadrian's successor, Antoninus Pius, adopted him as heir, the die was cast. The philosopher had been chosen by fate to rule. But even then, as he bowed before the Senate and accepted his destiny, he wrote in his private notes, "If you can find peace in yourself, you will find peace anywhere." He had no idea how much he would need that peace, for the storm of Rome was only beginning, and its quietest soldier was about to become its emperor. In the quiet corners of ancient Rome, whispers moved faster than soldiers, and among those whispers was a prophecy. They said a golden child would rise from the heart of the empire, a ruler who would bring both peace and sorrow, light and decay. He would be wise beyond his years, yet cursed to witness the fall of all he loved. The people called it myth, but the Senate, the priests, and even the emperor himself kept one eye on the boy named Marcus. From his earliest years, strange things seemed to surround him. Coincidences that felt more like fate, symbols that clung to him like shadows. When lightning struck near his home 3 times in 1 month, the augurs said the gods were speaking. When his pet bird died the day Hadrian fell ill, they said it was an omen of succession. And when the boy looked into the flames and said, "The fire doesn't hurt, only the fear does," even his tutors fell silent. The prophecy spread quietly through the corridors of power. Hadrian himself began to believe it. He summoned mystics, dream interpreters, and oracles from across the empire. All returned with the same words: "The Golden One will rule in wisdom, but his crown will be forged from suffering." Marcus never heard those words directly, but he could feel their weight. He didn't want to be divine or chosen. He wanted truth. Yet the more he resisted the myths around him, the more they grew. The city saw signs everywhere, in the stars, in the smoke of the temples, even in the flight of crows. And when Hadrian adopted Antoninus Pius, commanding him to raise Marcus as his heir, the people believed the prophecy was unfolding. It wasn't politics anymore, it was destiny. And destiny, in Rome, was a dangerous thing. But Marcus, he didn't act like the chosen one. He didn't flaunt power, didn't chase glory. Instead, he studied, meditated, and retreated deeper into silence. Some say he was afraid of what the prophecy meant. Others say he already understood it, that his future greatness would come only through loss. A palace servant once described finding him alone, kneeling before a dying candle, whispering, "If the gods wish it, let me suffer first." No one knew what he meant, but history would prove him right. The gods, it seemed, had accepted that offer, because every rise he made was paid for with pain. His father's early death, the endless wars, the plague that would one day ravage his empire. The one golden child prophecy wasn't a promise of greatness, it was a warning of endurance. Years later, when Marcus became emperor, an old scroll was found in the temple of Apollo. On it were written the same words that had haunted his youth. "From gold he comes, to dust he shall return. His wisdom will save none, but will outlast all." Even now, historians argue whether that prophecy was real or just a tale woven around his life, but perhaps that's the beauty of it, the uncertainty. Because prophecy or not, Marcus Aurelius lived as if every step he took was guided by something unseen. And maybe that's what made him different. He didn't seek to control the future, he only sought to understand it. And in doing so, the boy once called the Golden Child became something greater than prophecy. He became the quiet voice of eternity itself. The moment Marcus Aurelius accepted the imperial crown, he didn't feel triumph. He felt the weight, not of gold, but of eternity pressing down on his shoulders. Rome expected an emperor of glory and fire, someone who would conquer, expand, and dominate. Marcus offered something stranger, quiet wisdom, a disciplined mind, and a life ruled by thought rather than impulse. The Senate called it unusual, the people called it strange, and the gods, perhaps they called it necessary. He wore the crown like a mantle of responsibility, not privilege. Every day, every decision, every breath was guided by Stoicism, the philosophy that would make him immortal in thought, even as the world threatened to swallow him whole. To understand Marcus, you must understand the paradox of his rule. Empires are built on conquest, yet he sought balance. Armies marched under his command, yet he spent hours in private reflection. War drums echoed, and yet his soul demanded silence. It was a crown unlike any other, heavy not with jewels but with virtue. Advisors marveled at his calm. Soldiers whispered that he was unshakable, even in the bloodiest of battles. But Marcus never fooled himself. He knew philosophy couldn't protect him from suffering, it could only prepare him to endure it. And so, every morning before the city awoke, he wrote in his journal reminding himself, "Let no act of mine be cruel, no word vain. Let my mind be steady, my soul unwavering." Yet the crown demanded more than meditation. The empire was restless, its borders fragile. Tribes beyond the Danube pressed against Roman walls, hungry for revenge. Inside Rome, corruption festered, whispers of treachery filled marble corridors. Marcus faced the impossible: to govern wisely while war raged, to lead armies while preserving his soul, to remain human while acting divine. His solution was a strange kind of discipline. He listened more than he spoke, reflected more than he acted, and judged more than he condemned. Even when faced with decisions that would have made lesser men tyrants, he chose patience, resilience, and reason. And yet, behind that calm exterior, his heart burned with the awareness that philosophy alone could not shield him from destiny. The Stoic crown was a paradox, a lesson written in sweat, blood, and quiet thought. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire in chaos, yet sought order in himself. He became the emperor who spoke to no one but his conscience, who carried the weight of 1,000 lives while teaching that mastery of the mind was the truest power. He knew he could not stop war, prevent plague, or escape death, but he could rule himself. And in that, he discovered a strange form of immortality, not through conquest, nor through marble monuments, but through the calm endurance of thought, the steady heartbeat of reason against the storm. Marcus wore the crown not for glory, but as a shield for the soul, a silent testament to the idea that even in the darkest corridors of power, light could be found, if only one dared to look inward first. Night fell over the northern frontier, and the campfires of Roman legions glowed like scattered stars. Soldiers slept, their armor piled beside them, their swords buried in the cold earth. But in one small, flickering tent, Marcus Aurelius could not rest. He sat hunched over a wax tablet, the shadows of the flames dancing across his weary face. Outside, the wind carried strange sounds, the howl of wolves, the creak of tents, whispers of unknown voices. And inside, he wrote, recording thoughts that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the ordinary world. The soul is stronger than the body, and yet it trembles at visions it cannot name. The words hint at something more than meditation. Perhaps a glimpse into a reality he could not escape. Accounts from soldiers describe odd occurrences during the Marcomannic Wars. Legionaries spoke of their commander wandering the camp at night, staring into the darkness as if seeing something invisible to everyone else. Some claimed they saw strange lights flicker where Marcus paused. Others swore they heard whispers he alone seemed to understand. Even historians centuries later wondered if Marcus' disciplined mind had started to interpret omens from the air itself. He recorded nothing in public, yet in his private meditations, the subtle hints are there, lines that shift from calm reflection to urgent warning. Could these have been mere imagination, born from exhaustion and responsibility? Or were they true glimpses into something hidden, something no emperor had dared to see? In those nights, Marcus' visions were often accompanied by dreams that blurred the line between the living and the dead. He would wake drenched in sweat, murmuring words the soldiers could not understand. One night he wrote, "The empire is a shadow, its walls crumble silently. What is built in marble is broken in blood." The phrasing suggests foreknowledge, a sense that the fate of Rome was entwined with his own consciousness. These visions didn't make him fearful, and they made him vigilant. The philosopher emperor seemed to interpret the chaos of war as more than strategic movements. For Marcus, every campfire flicker, every rustle in the forest, every sigh of a dying soldier might carry a message. He believed that the universe, silent as it seemed, spoke, and only those who listened could survive. By dawn, Marcus Aurelius would rise, don his armor, and step into the battlefield as if nothing had happened. To the world he was calm, collected, the unshakable Stoic emperor. But the night's visions lingered, leaving invisible marks on his mind, shaping his thoughts and meditations. The war tent became a place of secrets, a crucible where philosophy and the supernatural met. What he saw, what he sensed, is lost to history, but its echoes remain in the intensity of his writing. The emperor who conquered the empire did not only fight armies. He wrestled with unseen forces, with shadows of destiny, with visions that haunted even the strongest mind. And in doing so, he became more than an emperor. He became a man listening to the whispers of eternity. There are dreams that fade with the morning light, and there are dreams that cling, haunting the mind long after the eyes open. For Marcus Aurelius, one particular vision refused to release him. He saw Rome not as a city of marble and order, but as a living beast teetering on the edge of chaos. In the dream, the streets ran with fire, the temples crumbled, and the people wandered, lost and fearful. Yet the strangest part was the silence, a silence so heavy it pressed against his chest, reminding him that power could not control fate. Marcus awoke, trembling, clutching his wax tablet, and wrote, "Nothing is certain. Only the soul can endure what the world cannot." This dream would follow him for years, shadowing every decision he made, a silent prophet whispering warnings he could neither ignore nor fully understand. The recurring dream began in his youth, long before he wore the imperial crown. Scholars say it may have been a reflection of anxiety, a psychological echo of the pressures of a golden destiny, but those closest to Marcus claimed it was more than that. They spoke of nights when he would sit alone, staring at the fire, murmuring lines that seemed to come from the dream itself. He would describe bridges collapsing, rivers flooding the forum, and citizens trapped beneath invisible weight. And yet, when the soldiers and advisors asked, he smiled calmly, masking the fear that lingered like a shadow across his heart. The dream was not just a warning about external events, it was a mirror of his inner struggle, the burden of knowing that wisdom alone might not be enough to save the empire he loved. As Marcus ascended to power, the dream became more vivid, more pressing. During campaigns on the Danube, after the long days of battle, he would fall asleep only to awaken in the same vision. Rome on fire, voices screaming in silence, the air thick with a strange, almost mystical foreboding. Some historians believe these visions inspired the urgency in his meditations. He wrote lines that alternated between calm reasoning and almost desperate reminders to himself. Accept the universe as it is. Endure it. Do not falter. The dream, whether divine or psychological, became his guide and his torment. Every night, the line between reality and vision blurred, forcing the philosopher emperor to confront the fragility of human life and the impermanence of empire. By the end of his reign, Marcus Aurelius had grown accustomed to the visitor that came each night. He no longer sought to chase it away. Instead, he learned to listen. The dream shaped his choices, his stoic reflections, and his understanding of power and mortality. Some say that this persistent vision was the key to his unparalleled wisdom. The knowledge that suffering is inevitable, that empires rise and fall, but the mind can remain unbroken. The dream that would not leave became, paradoxically, a source of strength, a silent teacher guiding the emperor as he navigated wars, plagues, and the treacherous corridors of Rome. And in the quiet of the night, when the world slept, Marcus Aurelius continued to write, to endure, and to transform a haunting vision into the philosophy that still whispers to us across the centuries. Imagine a world suddenly silenced by invisible terror. The streets of Rome, once alive with chatter, laughter, and the clatter of sandals, now echo with emptiness. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, walked these streets as if he were a ghost, witnessing the invisible hand of death sweep through his empire. Known today as the Antonine Plague, this mysterious disease struck in the 2nd century, leaving millions of Romans dead, entire legions decimated, and the empire trembling. For Marcus, it was more than a public health crisis. It was a philosophical crucible, a test of endurance, and a shadow that would forever darken the pages of his meditations. The plague began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Soldiers returning from campaigns along the Danube brought with them a sickness that spread like a whisper through towns and cities. The symptoms were brutal: fever, swelling, coughing, and ultimately, death. The Romans, with all their gods and temples, were powerless against it. Marcus watched as entire communities collapsed, families vanished, and soldiers he had trained and trusted fell like autumn leaves. But he did not panic. The Stoic emperor, true to his philosophy, faced the horror with calm reasoning. He recorded in his writings that while death was inevitable, panic was a choice. Yet behind the disciplined words, there was a deeper truth. A profound fear of a world he could not control, a world where reason and strategy were powerless against invisible forces. The plague forced Marcus into an almost supernatural vigilance. He traveled tirelessly, inspecting camps, hospitals, and towns, often exposing himself to the same deadly disease that claimed thousands. He made personal sacrifices, avoiding comforts, sleeping little, and enduring the fatigue that comes with constant exposure to suffering. Soldiers and citizens whispered that their emperor carried the weight of the world not only in leadership, but in empathy. Many historians believe that the Antonine Plague shaped his philosophy in ways previously unnoticed. The calm and measured tone of his meditations is said to emerge from nights spent pondering mortality, vulnerability, and the fragile nature of life. The plague was not just a historical event, it was a lens through which Marcus saw the impermanence of power, the limits of control, and the necessity of inner resilience. Despite the devastation, Marcus Aurelius persevered, balancing the empire's survival with the moral duty to its people. The plague revealed a hidden layer of the Stoic emperor, one capable of compassion, reflection, and endurance in the face of chaos. Rome survived, but not without scars. Millions were gone, and the memory of the plague lingered in Marcus's writings, haunting the calm prose with the weight of mortality. To modern readers, the Antonine Plague is a historical tragedy. To Marcus, it was a lesson in patience, wisdom, and the quiet courage required to lead when every visible force seems powerless. And so, amidst the whispers of death and the shadows of uncertainty, the philosopher emperor continued to write, reflect, and endure, leaving behind a legacy not just of conquest, but of unshakable thought and human resilience. Imagine holding a book that whispers across centuries, yet knowing parts of it have vanished, pages torn from time itself, secrets erased before anyone could understand them. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is one such work. While the surviving text offers profound wisdom and calm reflection, historians have long whispered about lost writings, entire passages that may have contained his deepest fears, most personal reflections, or knowledge the world was never meant to see. The mystery is unsettling. What could a man who ruled the greatest empire on earth have written in the shadows of his mind that even time could not preserve? The story of the lost pages begins with the fragile survival of his journals. Unlike other emperors, Marcus wrote not for the Senate, the people, or history. He wrote for himself. Wax tablets, scrolls, and private notes were scattered across palaces and military camps. Over time, through wars, fires, and political intrigue, much of his work disappeared. Some say scribes intentionally removed passages that revealed uncomfortable truths, perhaps his doubts about power, the empire, or even his own family. Others suggest the missing sections contained visions and warnings too dangerous for ordinary men to read. Soldiers and servants swore the emperor would hide his writings under floorboards or bury them in gardens, and when recovered, certain pages were illegible, faded as if by deliberate design. Scholars have pieced together tantalizing clues. There are references in later texts to meditations lost to the night, lines quoted in letters that do not appear in the surviving versions. Some of these fragments hint at an almost prophetic awareness, warnings of plagues, invasions, and betrayals yet to come. Other rumored passages are more personal, revealing Marcus's internal struggle with fate, his doubts about the gods, and a haunting sense of isolation that he would never speak aloud. Imagine a man who could control legions and empires, yet could not fully master the shadow of his own mind. The lost pages suggest a philosopher emperor grappling with visions and fears that could not survive the scrutiny of time. And perhaps in that gap lies the true depth of his wisdom and the mystery he left behind. What did Marcus Aurelius wish to hide, and why? Was it fear of judgment, a desire for privacy, or a secret too perilous for even posterity? The lost pages of Meditations remain a silent echo of a mind that stretched beyond the ordinary, touching truths that only he could bear. Their absence creates a tension between what we know and what we can only imagine, a gap that invites speculation, reflection, and awe. The emperor, who spoke so eloquently of virtue, mortality, and resilience, may have also glimpsed shadows of a knowledge no human was meant to hold. And in that loss, in the quiet spaces between his surviving words, the mystery of Marcus Aurelius endures, a whispered reminder that even the greatest minds leave some questions unanswered, waiting for those who dare to listen in the darkness. Night fell over Rome, and with it came a silence that the bustling city rarely knew. The emperor's palace, usually alive with the whispers of courtiers and the clatter of servants, seemed empty, as if the world itself held its breath. Marcus Aurelius would sit alone in his chamber, not with advisors or scribes, but with himself. These were his secret dialogues with the night, private reflections, silent conversations with his own soul, and sometimes with the unknown. By candlelight, he wrote in his tablets, not for glory, but for understanding. The words reveal a man wrestling with solitude, mortality, and the unseen weight of an empire. To him, night was not just darkness. It was a mirror. In these hours, Marcus asked the questions no one else dared to ask. What does it mean to lead? What does it mean to endure suffering? Can virtue survive in a world driven by greed and violence? He would pause, listen to the quiet, and write. Some lines read like instructions for life, others like confessions of fear. Do not be carried away by anger or grief. Observe the universe as it moves and accept what you cannot change. Yet beneath the calmness, scholars detect a tension, a sense that these meditations were more than philosophy. They were therapy, perhaps even attempts to communicate with forces beyond the visible. The night allowed him freedom, a time to confront what the day demanded he hide, the fragility of his own soul. Soldiers and palace attendants later recalled seeing him wandering corridors at odd hours, whispering to himself as if the walls could listen. Some believed he was speaking to the gods, others claimed he was conversing with spirits of the past or the shadows of the future. In truth, Marcus never explained these dialogues, but when we read Meditations, traces remain, repeated questions about destiny, fate, and the fleeting nature of power. These nocturnal reflections were a crucible in which he tempered both philosophy and leadership. The calm emperor the world knew was forged in private struggles, conversations he would never share, rehearsals of patience and virtue played out in candlelight. The secret dialogues with the night shaped Marcus Aurelius into something more than a ruler. They made him human, vulnerable, and wise beyond his years. The silence of the night offered clarity that no senate could provide, no battlefield could test, no advisor could teach. It was there that he confronted mortality, contemplated justice, and wrestled with unseen shadows. And perhaps most hauntingly, these dialogues hint at an emperor aware that Rome itself was fragile, that power was fleeting, and that even the greatest of men must confront their own inner darkness. When we read his writings today, we glimpse these intimate conversations, a whisper across centuries, a solitary voice reminding us that wisdom often grows in quiet, unobserved moments when only the night is listening. Behind every emperor stands a shadow, and behind Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, that shadow was a woman of beauty, ambition, and mystery, Faustina the Younger. To some, she was Rome's golden empress, the loyal wife who bore the emperor's airs and soothed his weary heart. To others, she was a figure wrapped in scandal, whispered about in dark corners of the palace. Rumors of infidelity, betrayal, and secret alliances swirled around her name like a curse. Yet Marcus never condemned her. Instead, he praised her virtues publicly, honored her after her death, and carried her memory in silence. Why? What did Marcus know about Faustina that history has forgotten? Faustina was not an ordinary woman. Born into nobility, raised within the pulse of Roman power, She understood the game of politics better than most men in the Senate. She was strong-willed, outspoken, and unafraid to challenge convention, traits that made her both admired and feared. During Marcus's campaigns along the Danube, she traveled with him, enduring the same hardships as the soldiers. Historians note her presence in military camps, a rarity for empresses of her time. But it was also during these years that rumors began to spread. Whispers of her involvement with generals, even of plots against Marcus himself. Whether true or not, those stories were never erased. They lingered, feeding the legend of a woman whose heart might have been as complex as the empire she ruled beside her husband. Yet Marcus Aurelius never turned against her. In his meditations, though he rarely mentions names, he speaks of gratitude for a faithful wife who shared his burdens and bore him many children. Some scholars believe these were coded affirmations, subtle defenses of a woman the world misunderstood. Others argue they were acts of denial, attempts to preserve his stoic composure against personal heartbreak. But there's another more haunting interpretation. Perhaps Marcus saw in Faustina not a source of scandal, but a mirror of his own struggle, the human battle between duty and desire, love and imperfection. The philosopher in him may have recognized that even betrayal, if it existed, was part of life's natural order, something to be accepted, not condemned. When Faustina died in 175 CE, Marcus's grief was profound. He declared her a goddess, built temples in her honor, and founded charities for orphaned girls in her name. Such devotion, even in the face of controversy, reveals the depth of his love, or perhaps his understanding. In her, he saw the embodiment of life's contradictions, beauty and chaos, devotion and temptation, loyalty and doubt. She was the silent partner to his wisdom, the emotional pulse behind his stoic calm. History remembers Marcus as the philosopher-emperor, the man who conquered himself. But perhaps he could only reach that serenity by loving and losing a woman who tested every principle he believed in. Faustina remains, to this day, a figure of both grace and mystery, the woman behind the wisdom and the shadow behind the light of Rome's greatest mind. Every light casts a shadow, and for Marcus Aurelius that shadow was his own son, Commodus, the child of a philosopher and an empress, born beneath the weight of destiny. To Rome, he was the golden heir, a promise of continuity. But to history, he became a symbol of ruin. The emperor who dragged the empire from the light of wisdom into the pit of corruption. It's one of the greatest paradoxes of all time. How could the most virtuous ruler raise the most disastrous successor? Was it fate, neglect, or something far more mysterious, a curse born from the burden of greatness itself? Commodus was not like his father. Where Marcus sought reflection, Commodus craved spectacle. As a boy, he was pampered, sheltered from the philosophy and hardship that had shaped his father's soul. Marcus tried. He taught him Stoicism, discipline, restraint. But the lessons bounced off the boy's mind like arrows off marble. Commodus wanted applause, not enlightenment. When he spoke, it was of glory and blood, not virtue or reason. As he grew, his fascination with gladiators and the arena consumed him. The same man who should have inherited his father's wisdom instead sought the crowd's roar and the thrill of combat. Even Marcus's closest advisors whispered their fears. The heir is not the man the empire needs. He is the man it will suffer. But Marcus, the philosopher, could not abandon his own blood. He believed in fate, that everything happens according to nature's order. In that belief lay his greatest strength and his greatest flaw. Against the advice of his council, he named Commodus co-emperor. Some say he saw no other choice. Others claim he foresaw the coming chaos but accepted it as part of the divine cycle. In his meditations, scholars detect a tone of resignation, as if he knew what his decision would unleash. "The universe is change," he wrote. "Life is opinion." Perhaps Marcus believed even Rome's downfall had its place in the grand design, but fate, as it often does, took those words literally. After Marcus's death, Commodus became the master of Rome, and the empire began to unravel. He renamed cities after himself, dressed as Hercules, and turned the Colosseum into his personal playground. He fought gladiators not for honor, but for spectacle, believing himself divine. The philosopher's legacy of reason and humility was drowned in a flood of ego and madness. And yet, in a tragic twist, Commodus was still his father's son. The reflection of what happens when wisdom is inherited, but not understood. The heir of shadows lived in defiance of the light that birthed him. In the end, Marcus Aurelius left the world a timeless philosophy, but also a warning that even the greatest wisdom cannot guarantee virtue in those who follow. The shadow always grows where light once shined, and Rome would pay the price for it. It was not the clash of swords or the betrayal of men that ended the reign of Marcus Aurelius, but silence. The philosopher king whose wisdom had guided the Roman Empire through war, plague, and despair met his final day not in triumph, but in quiet acceptance. It was the year 180 CE, and the emperor lay dying in the military camp of Vindobona, far from the marble halls of Rome. His body was weak, worn down by years of exhaustion and disease. Yet his mind, the same mind that had faced death in thought 1,000 times, remained calm. When his generals asked what should be done after he was gone, he simply smiled and whispered, "Do not mourn me, think instead of the order of the world." Marcus's final days were a portrait of serenity. He refused extravagant care, choosing instead to face nature's end as he had faced every challenge, with dignity and reason. He continued writing even as fever overtook him, his final words now lost to time. Soldiers who guarded his tent reported seeing him sitting upright through the night, murmuring softly as if speaking to unseen listeners, perhaps gods, perhaps the ghosts of his own thoughts. They said that in those final hours his presence seemed otherworldly, as if the man had already begun to drift beyond the boundaries of life. One historian later wrote, "He did not die. He ascended, leaving the body like one sheds a cloak." When dawn came, Marcus called his son Commodus to his side. Witnesses said his voice was faint but steady, his gaze clear despite the pain. What he told Commodus remains one of history's lingering mysteries. Some accounts claim he begged his son to rule wisely. Others say he only told him to remember virtue and temper. And then, according to a few ancient sources, Marcus turned away and whispered, "Go to the gods, it is time." Those were the last words ever spoken by the emperor, who had mastered himself. Commodus left his tent in tears, while the legions stood in silence. Their philosopher king had gone, and with him, perhaps, the last breath of Rome's golden age. When the news reached Rome, the empire mourned as it never had before. Temples filled with offerings, statues were draped in black, and philosophers across the empire spoke his name with reverence. Yet the air carried a deeper, almost supernatural stillness, as if the world itself paused to acknowledge the passing of a soul that had understood it too well. His body was burned, his ashes sealed in Hadrian's mausoleum, but his spirit, his words, would not die. They lived on in Meditations, the quiet diary of a man who ruled the world and yet sought peace within himself. The death of Marcus Aurelius was not an ending, it was the fulfillment of his own teaching, that every soul returns to the universe calm and unafraid. And somewhere, perhaps in the eternal silence he so often wrote about, the philosopher king finally found rest. The death of Marcus Aurelius was not just the passing of a man, it was the dimming of an age. Rome, the eternal city of marble and might, suddenly felt hollow, as if its spirit had departed with him. The people mourned, the Senate praised, but in the quiet corners of the empire there was unease, a sense that something sacred had ended. For decades, Marcus had been the empire's conscience, its philosopher heart beating steadily through chaos. Now that heart had stopped, and in the echoing silence, Rome began to tremble. The golden glow of wisdom faded, replaced by the flickering shadows of ambition, greed, and madness. At first, Rome tried to move forward. The legions returned home, the Senate continued its endless debates, and Commodus, the heir of shadows, took the throne. But something unseen had shifted. The order Marcus had built began to unravel. The streets grew violent, the treasury bled dry, and whispers of corruption seeped through the marble walls of power. Some said Rome was cursed, that the philosopher's death had awakened old spirits buried beneath the city's foundations. Others believed Marcus had foreseen this in his writings, that he knew Rome's strength was built not on conquest, but on virtue, and that without virtue, even the mightiest empire would crumble. His words became eerie prophecies, echoing across the years. What we do echoes in eternity. And echo they did. Monks in distant monasteries copied his meditations by candlelight, preserving the wisdom of a man whose empire was slowly dying. His teachings spread far beyond Rome, to scholars in Athens, mystics in Alexandria, even warriors on distant frontiers. But within the capital itself, the irony was bitter. The emperor, who preached self-control, was succeeded by a ruler enslaved to his own desires. The man who sought harmony with nature was followed by one who sought pleasure in destruction. Fires erupted in the city, riots broke out, and the arenas overflowed once again with blood. The Rome Marcus dreamed of, a world guided by reason and justice, began to collapse under the weight of its own shadows. Yet even as Rome burned, his voice endured. Soft, steady, timeless. His words became the ember that refused to die in the ashes of an empire. Generations later, philosophers, kings, and even modern thinkers would turn to his writings, hearing in them not the voice of a dead emperor, but the whisper of human resilience. Marcus Aurelius became more than a ruler. He became a spirit, a reminder that no empire lasts forever, but wisdom can outlive stone and steel. The ashes of Rome carried his echo, drifting through time, finding new listeners in every age. And perhaps, in that lingering voice, Marcus achieved what no conqueror ever could. Immortality through thought, serenity through surrender, and light through the dark ruin of the world he once ruled. They called him emperor, conqueror, philosopher. But Marcus Aurelius saw himself as something far humbler, a student. Not of men, not of politics, but of the universe itself. To him, every sunrise was a lesson in patience, every storm a teacher of endurance, every fleeting breath a reminder of nature's eternal rhythm. In his journals, those sacred pages we now call meditations, he never wrote as a ruler commanding an empire, but as a soul wrestling with itself, seeking harmony in chaos. His crown was a burden, his throne a test. Yet, through it all, he remained a learner, forever kneeling before the mysteries of existence. Marcus believed that knowledge was never conquered, it was borrowed. To live was to study, and to study was to grow closer to truth. Even as he sat atop the greatest empire the world had known, he confessed his ignorance to the stars each night. He studied the constellations not as omens of fate, but as reminders of humility, that even the mightiest man was but dust in the cosmic wind. His curiosity stretched beyond philosophy into nature, medicine, ethics, and logic. He questioned everything. Why are we born? Why do we suffer? What remains when the body fades? His answers were never final, only stepping stones toward greater understanding. In that, Marcus Aurelius became something rare. A man who ruled the world, yet refused to believe he understood it. While others sought certainty, Marcus embraced doubt. His wisdom grew not from pride, but from the courage to admit he was still learning. "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be," he once wrote. "Be one." To him, philosophy was not a game of ideas, but a discipline of living. Each failure was a lecture, each mistake a lesson. He learned patience from his enemies, gratitude from his losses, and strength from his fears. When he buried his children, he studied grief, not to escape it, but to understand its place in the divine order. When war raged across the northern frontiers, he studied chaos, and in its midst he discovered calm. In the end, the emperor who commanded legions became the philosopher who commanded his soul. He never claimed mastery over wisdom, only companionship with it. To Marcus, the universe was a living book, written in stars, carved in stone, whispered in the wind. And as long as one kept reading, one could never be truly lost. Centuries later, his lessons still breathe in the quiet hearts of those who seek meaning in a noisy world. He taught us that true power lies not in dominion, but in understanding, not in speaking, but in listening, not in ruling, but in learning. So perhaps Marcus Aurelius was never Rome's last philosopher king, but its eternal student, a man whose classroom was the cosmos, whose textbooks were his own doubts, and whose graduation was peace. And if you listen closely, in the silence between thoughts, you might still hear his whisper. Humble, eternal, and wise. The universe is change, life is opinion. Marcus Aurelius died, but his voice did not. The empire he ruled would crumble, the wars he fought would fade into history, yet his philosophy endured, silent, steady, immortal. Across centuries, through fire, conquest, and decay, the words of the philosopher king traveled farther than legions, deeper than walls, and higher than emperors' crowns. He left behind more than an empire. He left a mirror for humanity, a reflection of how one might live with virtue, resilience, and quiet wisdom, even when the world collapses around them. The surviving meditations became his true empire. Written as private reflections, they transcended time, culture, and language. Monks in medieval monasteries copied his words by candlelight. Renaissance scholars translated his texts into the vernacular, studying him as the blueprint of rational thought. Even soldiers and rulers in distant lands would reference his writings, seeking guidance in strategy, ethics, and personal fortitude. Unlike monuments of marble or gold which crumble or are looted, Marcus's legacy lived in minds and hearts. His empire became philosophical, infinite, and unknowable, a realm beyond death or decay, inhabited only by those willing to listen and reflect. And yet, there is a mystery in this enduring legacy. How did a man who faced endless chaos, betrayal, plague, and the fragile ego of his own son managed to craft wisdom that still resonates today? Was it discipline, compassion, or something deeper? An uncanny awareness of the human soul? Scholars have speculated that Marcus tapped into truths few men can see, balancing the demands of leadership with the silence of reflection. His legacy suggests that true power is not conquest but understanding, that the mind can outlast armies and thought can outlive stone. Every generation that reads him discovers a new layer, a new guidance, a new whisper from a man who mastered himself. From the ashes of Rome, from the collapse of dynasties, from the forgotten streets where his armies once marched, Marcus Aurelius continues to speak. He teaches that life is fleeting, that virtue is precious, and that the universe moves in cycles we cannot control. His legacy is not simply words on a page, it is the invitation to endure, to reflect, and to live thoughtfully in the face of chaos. Empires fall, kings die, and time erodes everything. But the soul of a philosopher who observed life, recorded his thoughts, and embraced mortality remains untouchable. The legacy that outlived time reminds us that even in the shadow of death, the human mind can shine, eternal and unbroken. And in every quiet moment, we hear him still, a man who ruled Rome, yet belonged only to wisdom itself. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire long gone, yet his thoughts still drift like shadows across the modern world. You won't hear his voice in the corridors of power or see him etched in neon lights, but his philosophy lingers, subtle, persistent, almost spectral. The principles he lived and wrote about continue to shape leaders, thinkers, and ordinary people who seek calm in chaos. Stoicism is no longer bound to marble halls or wax tablets. It whispers in boardrooms, classrooms, and the quiet corners of bedrooms, asking the same questions Marcus asked centuries ago. How should one endure suffering? How should one live with virtue? How does one remain steady when the world falters? Look around the modern world. Leaders facing crises, athletes battling pressure, students overwhelmed by uncertainty. All unknowingly touch the wisdom of the Stoic emperor. Entrepreneurs remind themselves, control what you can, accept what you cannot. Psychologists cite his reflections as a roadmap for resilience. Even social media memes, odd as it may seem, echo fragments of his teaching, the power of self-discipline, mindfulness, and rational perspective. Marcus's legacy persists not as an artifact, but as a living dialogue between the past and present. The emperor's invisible hand guides those who pause to think, who observe their own reactions, and who confront life's storms without surrendering to panic or despair. There's a mystery to how his words survive so quietly, yet so persistently. No one studies him to gain fame, no one worships him in temples, yet millions unknowingly inherit his lessons. His meditations, originally private, were never intended to shape empires beyond his own, and yet they do. Perhaps this is the genius of Stoicism itself. It travels without force, it influences without decree. CEOs, soldiers, teachers, and even artists have drawn strength from a man who wrote only for himself, centuries before their time. The shadow of his wisdom stretches across continents, reminding us that reflection, calm, and discipline are eternally relevant, no matter the era. In the modern shadows, Marcus Aurelius speaks softly but insistently. He challenges us to endure, to observe, and to act with virtue, even when the world is confusing, cruel, or unpredictable. He reminds us that control is internal, that suffering is universal, and that mortality need not be feared if the mind is trained in reason and resilience. His whispers linger in every quiet moment, in every journal entry, in every thoughtful pause amid the noise of contemporary life. The emperor may have ruled Rome, but his true empire is here, invisible and enduring, a subtle force guiding humanity through centuries of uncertainty. Stoicism, once a philosophy for one man in a vast empire, now shadows the modern mind, a mysterious, timeless presence, teaching us that wisdom never dies. It only waits for those willing to listen. The story of Marcus Aurelius is incomplete without its darker reflection. His son, Commodus, the emperor who taught patience, virtue, and stoic calm, raised a successor whose life seemed to mock every principle he cherished. Yet even in Commodus's excesses, shadows of Marcus's teachings can be traced, twisted, distorted, but unmistakable. The contrast between father and son is one of history, has most haunting mysteries, the greatest wisdom and the most catastrophic folly emerging from the same bloodline. Commodus was more than a spoiled heir. He was the living reminder that even the most careful instruction cannot fully shape human nature. He mimicked his father's rituals superficially, reading, meditating, and observing the traditions of governance, yet he did so without understanding their essence. Where Marcus sought self-mastery, Commodus sought spectacle. Where Marcus wrote for clarity of mind, Commodus acted for applause. And yet, in the shadows of his cruelty, one can detect fragments of Marcus's influence, an obsession with legacy, a preoccupation with power, and a strange, almost unconscious desire to be remembered. It was as if the philosopher's shadow had imprinted itself on the very soul of his son, only to be contorted into something unrecognizable. Historians and scholars have long debated whether Commodus's reign was inevitable. Could Marcus have done more to guide him? Or was this the cruel hand of fate, demonstrating the limits of even the wisest ruler's influence? Some ancient sources whisper that Marcus foresaw the coming chaos, leaving coded warnings in his meditations. Perhaps every line about virtue, resilience, and the transient nature of power was not just personal reflection, but a subtle lesson for a son who would never fully understand it. In that sense, Commodus becomes a living paradox, a cautionary tale hiding within the legacy of wisdom, a shadow cast by the light of his father's philosophy. And yet the shadow is not entirely bleak. The contrast between Marcus and Commodus illuminates the fragility of human nature, the tension between potential and choice, and the eternal struggle between reason and desire. Marcus's teachings, when viewed through the lens of his son's failures, gain a new, almost prophetic resonance. They remind us that wisdom is not automatic, that virtue is a choice, and that even the brightest guidance can be lost if ignored. The shadow of Commodus revisited shows the enduring mystery of legacy, how one life can produce both enlightenment and chaos, how love and duty can coexist with betrayal, and how history often speaks in contrasts, teaching us lessons we only understand centuries later. In this shadow, Marcus's voice remains, whispering to those who listen, that knowledge is powerful, but only when it is truly embraced. Picture the battlefield, the clash of swords, the screams of men, the smell of blood mixing with dust. And amidst it all, Marcus Aurelius, emperor, strategist, philosopher, walking calmly through chaos, a figure almost ghost-like in his composed reflection. While others sought glory or survival, he sought understanding. War was not merely a contest of armies, it was a mirror of human nature, a testing ground for discipline, virtue, and endurance. In these violent theatres, Marcus's philosophy was not abstract. It was life itself. From the Danube frontier to the northern provinces, Marcus faced enemies and crises that would break lesser rulers. Germanic tribes pressed relentlessly, plagues swept through his camps, and logistical nightmares threatened the empire's very survival. Yet he remained unwavering, writing in the margins of his campaigns, observing human behavior, with the eye of a philosopher. Soldiers noted his unusual demeanor. He did not boast, he did not rage, he simply acted with measured precision. Every decision was weighed not only for military outcome, but for moral integrity. Even in the din of battle, he meditated on control, on justice, and on the ephemeral nature of power. Some ancient accounts suggest a haunting aspect to Marcus's war strategy. He treated the battlefield as an arena for the human soul, not merely for conquest. He often delayed attacks, not from fear, but from reflection, testing the resolve of his men, observing the character of allies and enemies alike. It is said he sometimes slept among the wounded, offering counsel and consolation, blending leadership with compassion. To the historian, this may seem extraordinary. To Marcus, it was necessary. He saw every action as a reflection of inner virtue. Victory meant little without wisdom, and war itself was merely a stage on which human behavior, its fears, courage, and follies, could be observed, studied, and perhaps understood. The philosopher in the midst of war left lessons far beyond the battlefield. His meditations, written between campaigns, carry echoes of these experiences, reflections on mortality, courage, and the transient nature of conflict. Marcus taught that even in chaos one could maintain clarity, even in destruction one could preserve virtue. And perhaps the greatest mystery of all is that the man who commanded legions could also command his own mind so completely, that in the heart of violence he found serenity, and in the midst of death he glimpsed the eternal. His legacy reminds us that true strength is not in swords or shields, but in wisdom, patience, and the courage to remain unshaken when the world burns around us. Close your eyes and imagine a map, not of lands or seas, but of the human soul. Intricate, winding, marked with peaks of virtue and valleys of doubt. That is what Marcus Aurelius' Meditations offer, a guide to navigating the inner landscape of existence. Written in the quietest moments of his life, often in secrecy, these reflections reveal the hidden corridors of thought, the chambers of fear, and the windows of insight within the emperor's mind. They are a compass for living, a map, not of Rome, but of the human heart. Marcus's writings are striking because they are both intensely personal and universally applicable. He charts the struggles of anger, the traps of desire, and the illusions of fame. Yet he does so with an almost clinical observation, noting patterns of thought as one might track constellations in the night sky. His soul becomes a terrain to explore, the peaks of discipline, the rivers of grief, the forests of temptation. Each entry in Meditations serves as a landmark, a point of reflection for those navigating life's chaos. In this way, Marcus transforms philosophy into cartography, turning fleeting thoughts into enduring guidance. There is a mystery embedded in this map. Though we can trace his meditations, we can never fully walk his path. Some passages were lost, perhaps destroyed, perhaps hidden. Others remain fragmented, leaving gaps in the journey. Yet these absences are part of the design, inviting readers to fill them with their own contemplation. His map is not complete, intentionally so, reminding us that the soul cannot be fully charted by another. Each reader, each seeker, becomes a cartographer, using his markers to navigate personal storms, ethical dilemmas, and moments of fear or doubt. Marcus's wisdom is alive, shifting with every mind that engages it. When we follow his path, we find guidance in unexpected places. In one line, he teaches acceptance of mortality. In another, the importance of humility. He explores the tension between duty and desire, control and surrender, permanence and transience. Reading Meditations is like walking through a labyrinth illuminated by candlelight, every turn revealing both clarity and shadow. Marcus Aurelius offers a map not to perfection, but to understanding. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery, that an emperor who ruled the world could leave a guide for souls, not subjects, showing that the ultimate conquest lies within. His meditations are a testament that even in solitude, in fleeting moments of reflection, the human mind can chart a course toward truth, resilience, and serenity. A map that continues to guide centuries of wanderers through the uncharted terrain of the soul. Even centuries after his death, Marcus Aurelius whispers, "Not through monuments of stone or gilded statues, but through the subtle voice of thought, the quiet echo of wisdom, the silent cadence of reflection. Rome may have fallen, dynasties may have crumbled, and his son's folly may have marred the empire, yet the philosopher emperor endures, an unseen presence in the minds of those who pause, who question, who seek." It is a whisper that crosses time, inviting us into a dialogue with a man who once commanded armies, counseled kings, and yet spoke mostly to himself. Marcus's whisper is found in the margins of life. In the modern city, in a quiet room at night, in the small decisions that shape character, his words resurface. The universe is change, life is opinion. The whisper is both intimate and profound, asking us to reflect on our mortality, our choices, and our virtues. It reminds us that power is transient, fame is fleeting, and true strength comes from within. Even when we do not consciously read his meditations, the philosophy seeps into our actions, in moments of patience, in the courage to endure suffering, and in the quiet resilience of the human spirit. Marcus's voice is invisible, yet unmistakable, a ghost in the machinery of life. The mystery of his whisper lies not only in its persistence, but in its subtlety. Marcus did not seek followers, did not demand worship, and never proclaimed himself a prophet. He wrote for himself, and yet the universe found a way to carry his voice forward. Scholars, soldiers, leaders, and seekers across continents and centuries have unknowingly tuned in to that quiet guidance. It is a whisper that asks no obedience, yet inspires reflection, a presence that demands no recognition, yet reshapes thought. It is a testament to the enduring power of introspection, discipline, and humility, that the life of one man can resonate long after empires and wars are dust. As we close this journey through his life, we see Marcus not merely as emperor, not merely as philosopher, but as a timeless guide. His whisper asks us to live deliberately, to embrace virtue, to observe the world without attachment, and to understand that our own mortality is the truest teacher. The shadows of Rome, the chaos of his son's reign, the plague and the wars all fade in comparison to the quiet wisdom he left behind. And so in every contemplative moment, in every reflective pause, the eternal whisper of Marcus Aurelius reaches across the centuries. A reminder that while empires fall and men die, the pursuit of wisdom, the reflection on life, and the courage to face existence with serenity can endure forever. As we close the pages of Marcus Aurelius's life, we see a man who ruled not only an empire, but the depths of his own soul. From the chaos of war to the plague that haunted Rome, from the shadows cast by his son Commodus to the silent wisdom of his meditations, Marcus taught us that true power lies in understanding, reflection, and courage in the face of uncertainty. His life reminds us that even when the world crumbles around us, the human mind can remain calm, resilient, and eternal. If you found yourself drawn into the mysteries of the philosopher emperor, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to About Mystery, and hit the bell icon so you will never miss a journey into the hidden stories of history's most fascinating figures. Share your thoughts in the comments. What part of Marcus's life surprised you the most? Was it his serenity in war, his reflections in solitude, or the shadows of his son Commodus? And if you're hungry for the next hidden tale in history, get ready to step into the mists of early medieval England. Our next story will follow Ethelstan, 994-939, the first king of a united Anglo-Saxon England, a ruler whose vision forged a kingdom from fractured lands, whose strategies and cunning would shape a nation, and whose reign holds mysteries that still echo through the centuries. So stay tuned, because at About Mystery, the past isn't just history, it's a living story waiting for you to uncover.